Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Malignant Young Pac dotting inside my chest, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, you lit. Okay, how's everybody doing out there? Appreciate you guys for stopping by. So, I do have the round 7 game for you between Fabiano Caruana and Wesley. So, you know, former and current U.S. champion on the scene. So, you know, you guys do know this is a Chess 960 event, the Champions Showdown. So that's why the board looks a little bit strange. You're probably thinking, wait a minute, why does the board look weird? It's a Chess 960. So 960 possible combinations. So, appreciate everybody coming by very much. For all my people in the Philippines, I will say magandang umaga, mabuhay, kumusta na aking mga kaibigan, masaya ko makinig muli. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Appreciate you very much. We are going to see who is malakas. Bam! For anybody, well, I guess, yeah, everybody else is coming from the United States, as the picture shows. So I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. If you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. Let me get the volume up a little bit. You guys gotta let me know if the volume is too high. This definitely sounds a lot lower than my usual board. So I'm still kind of messing with the volume. Definitely give me feedback on this, because this is a completely different board. So this isn't the same even website that I use for my actual like previous analysis. So, you know, feel free to tweak. So let's go ahead and go. So we got C4. So, you know, as you guys know, this would be the English opening. So I mean, you know, the structures sometimes end up being pretty similar. The thing about it is, you know, you do have unusual pawn weaknesses when you do Chess 960, because as you guys can see, I mean, there's literally nothing protecting this pawn. Over here, it's just kind of on its own. Usually there's a rook behind it. So, you know, there's some delicacy as far as like, you know, some delicateness, however you say the word, in trying to make sure that when you're pushing pawns, they're protected, and then also protecting the pawns that are just kind of naturally sitting in your position. So we have F5, and we got D4, G6. So, I mean, this is something similar to like, you know, a modern kind of like a Dutch type situation. So we got G3, knight comes to B6, and now we have a double attack on this pawn. So we got to do something about that. So B3 is definitely an option, but we see knight to A3 in the game. We have D5. Just chipping away at the, it's not really the center that white has established, but just the far advanced pawns that they have established. You know, putting your own stake, you know, your own claim in the center. So we got C5, so we have a nice little advanced pawn for white. Knight 6 comes back to D7. You know, as you guys know, you know, whenever you do have knights, you know, that are both capable of going to the same square, you have to note which one. And because you can't say knight B to D7, because there are actually 2 knights on the B file, you have to make sure that you show exactly which level of one comes. So we're going to see, like I said, knight 6 to D7. We got F4, stopping any you know, further advancement of pawns for black. We got B6, because that's really one of the only pawn breaks in the position. I mean, you have you know, an F4, or you have a G5 possibility. But that's, you know, possibly opening up the king a little bit too much. You do have to make sure that your king isn't passing through danger when you're trying to castle. So if you did open this file, it would be kind of hard for black to get castled there. So we have B6, like I said, attacking the pawn chain. Knight comes to B3. We see C6. Bishop comes to E3, which looks extra strange in front of this pawn. But it's all it's all good. It's not bad. Bishop comes to F7. We see castles by white. Castles by black. Bishop comes up to F3. So, you know, as you can see, you know, white has actually done a really good job of kind of getting their pieces out. That's one of the other things when you're playing Chess 960 that's kind of difficult sometimes, because, you know, your pieces aren't going to go to the most natural squares that you normally would put them on. So a lot of the times people can feel their way out of an opening by, like, you know, playing the knights to certain squares, you know, moving their bishops out, you know, stuff like that, you know, becomes pretty second nature. But this definitely makes you think, like, you know, how do I place my pieces? Especially because, I mean, this bishop is actually kind of bad because it doesn't really have anywhere to go. It's kind of blocked in by its own pawn. So queen comes to B7. We see knight down to C2. We got knight over to A6. We got G4. pawn takes G4, bishop takes G4. We have pawn takes C5, and then we have pawn takes C5. And this actually gives white like the ability to actually make some moves, and it actually gives them the ability to like better their pieces. Because as you guys can see right now, you know, their pieces are doing pretty good. You know, their bishop's out, this bishop's out, these rooks are on, you know, this one's on a half open file, you know, and so basically, I mean, you kind of looking at the D4 square like, man, it looks pretty scrumptious. Like, let me just pop a knight in there or the bishop and stuff like that. So this actually, you know, pawn takes C5 as black actually gives white some possibilities, but it takes playing the right moves after this position. So we actually see E5 by black, and this is white's opportunity to make sure that that D4 square is extra solid. But unfortunately, we actually see F5 from Fabiano Caruana, and you guys are going to see the problem with this move in a minute. But going back, white actually had, like I said, a really good opportunity to actually take the pawn on E5 here and basically protect this D4 square. You know, black is not pushing this pawn anytime soon. So, I mean, it's just giving you a chance to, you know, better your pieces. So after knight takes E5, bishop coming back to H3 would be fine. Like I said, you're putting a piece here on D4. Most likely it's going to be knight C to D4. You can even put the bishop if you want to. Just however you want to do it. But this actually activates white's pieces a lot. But like I said, we did see F5 in the position. So that closes the position, but it also gives black the ability to make their own pawn push and their own stake of D4. So we got knight to F6, back in the bishop up, and then we see D4. And as you guys can see, like now you don't have the ability. So not only is black advancing their pawns further down, they're now inconveniencing your pieces. So that was a very, very critical point of the game right there to make sure that you secure D4 as white. So that was definitely one of white's winning chances. Bishop goes up to H6. This is not attacking the rook because you just had bishop to G7. And that's why the bishop, the dark square bishop, is just a really great defender of the position. We see rook up to D3. But as you guys can see, the major problem with not liberating your knight and getting your pieces a little bit farther out and not securing D4 is now you actually are going to start getting attacked. You actually have queen to E5. You have queen to E7. And this is placing a double attack on this pawn. And so, I mean, you don't really have, like, I mean, you have some way to protect it. But like I said, you know, your pieces are a little bit jumbled up. And now you have to kind of figure out where you're going to put your knight. You know, your knight is doing a really good job of protecting this square. So you definitely don't want to move it and allow like some knight to B4s to come in, because then you got your pawn and your rook hit. So that's really inconvenient. So we actually see knight to A5 by white, which kind of maybe looks like a counterattack. You know, you're kind of hooking this pawn up and stuff like that. But if you want to go ahead and pause the video and see what black actually has the ability to play in this position, it's a really nice, it's just a really nice move ultimately. And it's really one of those kind of quiet moves that you can play. Go ahead and pause it and see if you can figure this move out. Okay, cool. So what we actually saw in the game was just the immediate knight takes C5. Which, I mean, it's not the worst move ever. It actually does give quite a bit back to white. But the super, like, crazy move, and I think this was actually kind of hard to find because it's such a quiet, like, you know, unassuming move, is actually bishop to D5. It's, like I said, it's just a very quiet move. But it just simply just protects this pawn. And, I mean, you guys can see that the threat on this pawn is still very much alive. And there's not really the greatest way to defend it. I mean, you kind of have to go B4. But after B4, you see knight to E4. And, I mean, you guys can see the major difference in this position between the position that we had a second ago. This knight is much better placed. This bishop is nicely placed. You know, you definitely don't want to trade off this bishop and allow this bishop to come in because you have so many weaknesses around your king. Also, this queen is about to start coming to H4. So you just really, I mean, you know, especially, I mean, if we have a situation of trades here, you know, this rook is activated as well. So, you know, the position has just opened up, like, greatly for black. So bishop to D5 was a really nice move. But like I said, we did see knight takes C5, which isn't like a blunder, but, you know, it's just like, it's just giving white a little bit of chances here. So knight takes C6, queen goes over to C7, knight takes D8, and then you have the Zweishenzug move, knight takes D3. You have to take that back on D3, and then queen takes on D8, and then we have knight to B4. And knight to b4 actually just allows a direct attack on your piece that's undefended. And the problem is, I mean, you have this bishop attacking this square, so you can't really move the knight. So the queen comes down to d6. Bishop takes on g7, throws that move in there. King takes on g7, and then you have a3. So a3 seems like it kind of like takes care of all your problems. What is actually possible in the position is actually a5. You know, a5 is very much wanted because, I mean, you know, you're just going to be putting the knight on. I mean, you really only have this square to put it on. Then you have the rook swinging over, and it's just not nice. But we did see knight over to h5, and you guys notice now that this square is incredibly weak. White does not have a dark squared bishop, so f4 is a perfect outpost for black to land on. And the unfortunate thing about it is you're most likely going to have to give up an exchange if the knight ever does go there. So speaking of that, you have pawn takes g6, pawn takes g6, queen to g5. You have a5 knocking the knight. You have bishop to g4, which is throwing a nice little counterattack, you know, on your knight. Rook comes to h8. You see knight down to c2, and then now you have knight to f4. And like I said before, like, you absolutely cannot allow this knight to live on this square. Like, this is just too nice of a square. So you are forced to give up the exchange. It's actually the top move in the position to give up the exchange. So rook takes f4. You see pawn takes f4. Queen takes on a5. And the crazy thing is, even though white is up an entire pawn, you know, you are down the exchange. So, I mean, this is just a very nice position for black to have. Queen comes to f6. You see h3, trying to defend your king side a little bit. We see king to h6, queen down to d2. And, you know, g5 pretty much, like, seals the deal because, I mean, like, this is a really strong pawn chain. And you don't really have a lot of play as white. You know, queen comes to f2. We're trying to throw a counterattack on d4, but rook to d8 just takes care of that. You have queen to e2, but the problem is for white that black always has the ability to contest this file. So we see rook to e8, and I mean, the queen doesn't have like a whole lot of real estate to really go to. We see queen back to f2. Bishop comes to g6 because we're saying if you take my pawn, I'll just take your pawn, and then we're just going to be we'll just call it a fair trade. So knight takes on d4. We see bishop takes on d3. Knight comes down to f3. And then we have rook to e2, which is actually really nice because, yes, it does kind of look dangerous because the bishop is opposite it, but you are getting an immediate tempo on the queen. So now the queen is forced to move. So we see queen to c5. Rook takes on b2. So now the pawns are completely even, and you are just down an exchange as white. Knight comes up to e5. Bishop comes to e4. We got a4, but this just allows queen to b6, and you guys hear me say this all the time. If you are up material, it is usually almost always beneficial for you to trade pieces down. You usually can just result in your opponent just having less pieces than you ultimately. So queen to b6 is pinning this queen to this king, and so it's making it to where, I mean, you just pretty much have to trade pieces, you know, ultimately at some point. So knight comes to f7, trying to throw an intermezzo in. King comes to g6. Knight comes back to e5 with check. King goes to g7, and then now you are forced to trade on b6. Rook takes on b6. Bishop comes up to d7. We're trying to make sure that we at least hold on to this pawn that we have. Like, we don't want to just lose the pawn. So rook comes down to b1. Yeah, okay, before I forget, after a4, there was actually a really, like, insane move that the computer is giving, and this variation of moves is crazy. I just wanted to show this. So f3 is actually by far the top move in the position instead of queen to b6. And so the variation goes bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, queen comes up to d6, queen takes d6, knight to f7 with check, king to h5, and then knight takes d6. And the computer is actually suggesting that you play this way. I mean, look at it. Like, you know, black is down a pawn, yes, but they have a rook and a bishop against your knight. Like, it's just not, I don't know. Man, this is what the computer is saying is best. It's insane. But like I said, we did see queen takes b6, rook takes b6. We see bishop up to d7, a rook down to b1 with check. King comes to f2. We see rook to b2 with check. King goes down to e1. We see king to f6. Knight comes down to c4. And we're just hoping that black just leaves his rook on c2 and we can win it for free. But we're not going to do that because we're Wesley so. Malakasi Wesley so. So we see rook over to a2. We got knight to d6, king comes to e5. We see knight to f7 with check, and it is actually in this position that white resigns the game. And, I mean, it gives a little I mean, you could pretty much look at the position and just see, like, why white resigned. But, I mean, if you're unsure, the best move in the position by far by black is going to be king to d4. And then it gives 2 different moves as pretty much like the best moves that you can play in the position. There's knight to d6, in which you're attacking the bishop on e4. But, I mean, the bishop just simply moves out of the way. And then, I mean, it's pretty much the same idea if you play bishop to e6. But, like, early, like with the bishop, I mean, the rook is just going to move out of the way. So, I mean, you don't really have any solid attacks as white. And, I mean, everything being equal, I mean, you're just down an entire exchange. So, I mean, that's just not... You can't succeed with that. I mean, you're going to get in a box as well. This bishop is going to come down to d3. And, I mean, the king is going to be able to come down to e3. And so you're just kind of, you know, boa constricted in this box. And you got this pawn that's pushing. It's just, you just can't do anything about it, man. So, I appreciate everybody for coming by. Maraming salamat aking makaibigan. Mabuting pagbati, ingat lagi. And makita tayo mamaya. And paalam. And I'll see you guys next time.